Should Keir Starmer give Europe the cold shoulder and cozy up to Donald Trump instead? Well, one of President-elect Trump's top aides has told The Times that Britain should align itself with the United States on trade rather than pursuing closer ties with the European Union. There are fears that a second Trump administration could trigger a global trade war, with Trump promising blanket tariffs of up to 20% on goods imported into the United States.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff, and it's my favorite word. It needs a public relations firm to help it, but to me, it's the most beautiful word in the dictionary. It's going to be a positive, not a negative. Let me just tell you. Let me tell you. I know how committed you are to this, and it must be hard for you to, spend 25 years talking about tariffs as being negative, and then have somebody explain to you that you're totally wrong.
So what could that mean for UK trade with the United States? The Conservative governments of Boris Johnson and Theresa May both failed to get a free trade deal. Let's speak now to Stephen Moore, Senior Economic Advisor to Donald Trump's campaign. Good afternoon, Stephen.
Hi, Carol. Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you with us this afternoon. Tell us why you think that the UK should align itself more closely with the United States, especially given what we've just heard from Donald Trump about tariffs.
Yes. Well, I was talking to one of your reporters late last week, and I guess I lit a match and I started a forest fire here. But I would say that, what I was trying to explain is that, first of all, Britain is certainly one of America's closest allies, and we hope to continue our economic and national security bonds. It's very important for both countries. The point I was trying to make in that interview is that, Britain is sandwiched between the European Union and the United States. And I think the struggle for Britain for the last many decades is, will Britain move more towards the U.S. economic model, which is more free market oriented and less big government oriented, or the European model, which is more socialist. And I think the evidence is pretty clear. I mean, I was just looking up the numbers, by the way, Carol, before I came on your show. If you go back 25 or 30 years ago, the U.S. economy and the European economies were roughly the same size. The U.S. was a little bit bigger, but, pretty much the same size, and the population roughly the same size. Today, the U.S. economy is about 50% bigger than the European Union. And what does that mean? It means we've been growing at a much, much faster pace than the socialist countries of Europe. And that is why I made the statement that Britain should really look at our model. And by the way, we don't always do everything right in the United States, but overall, we do have a smaller government where our taxes are generally lower than those in Europe, and that has worked well for the United States, and I think it would work well for Britain. And one last thing, I think that this crazy budget that just passed with the Labour government is doing exactly the wrong thing. They raised the payroll tax, they raised the capital gains tax. I saw you just made reference to raising the what we call our death tax. You call it the inheritance tax. Those are all going to have negative effects on the British economy.
Well, let me ask you then about what we've been hearing from Donald Trump about tariffs. I mean, if his administration, which you're very close to, is going to impose tariffs on imports from countries presumably including the UK, why would it then be in our interest to try and align with the US? Because presumably British goods are not going to be very attractive to American consumers if they come with a price tag bumped up by those tariffs.
So I think if you were interviewing Donald Trump and not me, I know what Donald Trump would say. He'd say, well, wait a minute, you have a value-added tax in Britain, which is effectively a tariff on when we sell things to Britain. And we don't have a value-added tax when you sell stuff to us. So I think that Trump believes in parity. And what he'd like to do is actually have, Britain lower its taxes on the stuff that we sell you, and we would potentially lower our taxes on the stuff that comes in from Britain, and that would be a win-win situation. I've always been very much in favor of a Britain and American free trade agreement. As you know, Carol, we have something called the U.S. Canada-Mexico trade agreement, and that has worked well for the United States. Now, I'm sort of speaking for myself, but I think Trump would generally agree with this, that we could have a better trade relationship. Now, that being said, you are right that Trump is talking about a 10 or 20% across the board tariff on all countries bringing in goods to the United States because he thinks the current trading system is unfair.
But as what you've talked about there, a lowering of tariffs on both sides, as you say, that would amount to a free trade agreement. What do you think realistically are the chances of one being agreed between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, given that when Donald Trump was last in the White House and his friend Boris Johnson was in power here in the UK, we didn't get one then?
Yeah. Well, I think both sides made some mistakes there. It's something we've been talking about for 20 years. And so I would love to see that happen. I know many of my friends in the incoming Trump administration would like to see it as well. As I said earlier, we do have a free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, and that's worked pretty well for all three countries. What Trump is really, when he talks about trade and tariffs, he's mostly talking about one country, and that is not Britain. He is mostly targeting China because China is an enemy and an adversary of the United States, and they cheat and they steal, and we can't go on with that kind of relationship. So I think when you hear Trump talk about these massive tariffs, I think mostly those would be oriented towards China.
But if there were to be some sort of free trade agreement,
Yep.
do you think that Donald Trump and his incoming team would insist on, for example, free access for American healthcare companies into the British healthcare system, which, as you know, we have a state, the NHS, a free at the point of delivery public health system.
Yes, right.
Would it mean free access for American poultry farmers to send their chlorine-washed chickens over here?
Yeah, I was in London a couple of years ago, and I was talking to a number of both people on the street, but also public officials, and they brought up both of those issues: the British healthcare system and the chickens. I'm not so sure why the chicken issue is such a big one. I guarantee to your listeners, we have clean and yeah, our chickens are safe to eat. But nonetheless, I mean, I guess the point I would make is that those are negotiated. Those are points that will be negotiated. I know those are very important issues to the British public, and so we'd have to work around that.
And what do you think then that Keir Starmer would have to do in order to take advantage of what you seem to feel is actually an opportunity for a free trade agreement, which others have said is frankly not very likely?
Well, again, this is a new administration. We do know what Trump did in his first term, and he did implement tariffs. And I have to say, Carol, and I'm, by the way, more of a free trade guy than Donald Trump is, but the fact is that Trump did raise tariffs in his first term. And on the other hand, when we have friendly countries like Mexico and like the UK, I think we want to put those countries in a different category, and so that I guess would be the way that Donald Trump would explain it. And my advice, though, is that if Britain wants to, resume the high growth that you've had historically, you have to do things to lower your public expenditures and lower your taxes. Well, that's one thing we're going to be doing in the U.S. What Trump wants to do is lower taxes, Carol, on things that are made in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and increase a bit the taxes on things that come into the United States. And so that's his overall philosophy.
And how much do you think personal relationships are going to count in all of this? We are told that Keir Starmer, along with the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy, had a very nice dinner with Donald Trump. Do you think the fact that David Lammy described Donald Trump a few years ago as a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathizing sociopath are going to make it harder for good relations between the two governments?
It could, certainly. I mean, those are outrageous statements to make about a United States president. And so, he should apologize for defaming our president. But, I think they could kiss and make up. And I think we could have a good, stable relationship. I mean, Trump wants to bring peace to the world. He wants to bring prosperity to the world. I've always believed, and I think Trump does too, that as goes the United States generally, so goes the world. We saw when Ronald Reagan was president in the 1980s, as we adopted a more free enterprise system, a lot of the rest of the world followed our lead. And I hope that would also happen with Britain and other countries as Trump's, presidency unfolds. Remember, he only has one more term. He only has 4 more years. So he has to do what he wants to do in a hurry.
Stephen Moore, really good to talk to you this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night.